Our disability is our greatest strength. It gives us the supervision to see the issues facing humanity from a more inclusive perspective and the grit to fight back against all odds. Welcome to Super Adaptables, the More Than Walking video podcast discussion. Welcome, everyone, to Super Adaptables, the podcast where people of all abilities gather to discuss pressing issues that affect the disability community and their implications for the world at large. We're your hosts. I am Corey Feasley, C4 complete quadriplegic since 2005.
And I am Jonathan Sigworth, C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006, both of us hailing from the great state of Connecticut.
We are recording this on Thursday, the 10th of October, 2024, and in a little bit, we'll be discussing with some amazing fellow super adaptables about policies of propaganda, political rhetoric, and its effect on marginalized communities.
So, Corey, this is such a complex topic to cover because politicians are continuously campaigning and vying for voters' attention. The implications of what they say or the policies their administration implements can't always be quantified during one election cycle or during political parties' tenure while in office.
That's true. The political world is no stranger to divisive language, but what happens when campaigning shifts from policy debate to propaganda, and who pays the price? Campaigning doesn't come cheap. According to one statistic from 2020, a congressional and presidential races collectively cost over $14 billion. And while smear campaigns have come to be expected in recent years, the mudslinging between candidates has turned into fearmongering with racial overtones that stereotype and vilify entire communities.
As a result, programs to protect and support vulnerable minority groups, including the disabled community, are in jeopardy even more than they already were. Sticks and stones may break bones, but surely the policies of propaganda can hurt all of us in the end.
So let's talk about it. But before we do, we want to emphasize that our goal for these conversations is to make us think critically, respect each other's perspectives, and find some sort of middle ground. We also want to be clear that More Than Walking endorses no political party or candidate, and that the views expressed by each guest are their own and do not reflect the opinions of More Than Walking.
So, Corey, let's bring tonight's topic close to home. When have you ever been misled?
Oh my gosh, y'all. Indeed, I have. So, when I was a sophomore in high school, I got into a fight, and it was the summer. Everyone typically would meet up at the local recreation center, right? So, it was over a girl, and there were these two dudes who were instigating the situation. I was on one side of a brick wall, and my friend was on the other. The two boys who were walking back and forth telling me and my friend that each of us was talking crap to another. And this exchange went on for some time. I was trying to de-escalate the situation, but eventually all of the he said, she said business got the best of my friend. And he came around the corner and called me, lack of a better word, a female dog. At which point I had enough. And I finally confronted him, which consequently ended up with us fighting. But after about a week, I returned to the recreation center and we eventually pieced it up. We're still cool to this day.
Man, I wouldn't want to fight you, Corey, even in your power chair. You just run me over like a pancake.
That's
I
a
mean,
fact.
all of this, all it takes is for someone to spread a falsehood. And even as kids, we go to war with each other, right? So it's not surprising that we find ourselves in those situations today at a global political level. My situation was slightly different from Corey's. I mean, as mentioned in our previous podcasts, my friends and I participated in extreme unicycling in high school. And one day, my buddy Tim and I saw a railing that we were anxious to grind on. And rail grinding. This occurred during the winter. And as you can imagine, in New England, it can be quite cold during the season and there can be lots of ice. And so we agreed I would go first and he would go second. I geared myself up because I was excited to try something new, but also overly confident because I wasn't alone in my attempt. And as you can imagine, well, let's just say I improperly landed on the rail and my tailbone. I looked back expecting Tim to follow through, but of course he chickened out. Who can blame him? But it goes to show you that you can't trust everything someone tells you, even when it's those closest to you.
Yeah, that's crazy. Like Tony Hawk of your day. But with friends like that, who needs enemies?
I mean, I do the same, Corey, looking back. I definitely misinformed myself in that situation on appropriate activities during icy weather.
Kids don't grind alone. Well, with that, We want to welcome the other super adaptables with us today. And as we call on you, say hello, your name, where you're calling in from, your disability, and briefly, have you ever been misinformed and did it lead you to make a rash decision? What were the consequences? Tahira, I would love for you to start us off.
There we go, the unmute button. This is Tahira Johnson. I am C45 incomplete, injured in 2007 in a roller derby match. And I found something really interesting on a YouTube channel called Chupla, I don't know if that's right, CHUPPL. And they had something on the Havana syndrome for anyone who's interested. It's really interesting. But one thing they mentioned was um, kind of on a side subject was that the Cold War happened at a time when humanity was ready for a global economy, and whoever won would be able to rig the system, basically. The fight over ideologies was really the fight for which superpower would be able to control and make the new rules for the new interconnected system. And so that's always growing up, being in high school in the 80s with that sort of hyper Cold War stuff, I always found exceedingly aggravating. And I think it was always that feeling of being just the propaganda, I guess, and that it wasn't so much about freedom as much as the economy and controlling the global economy. So I feel like it just permeates society, and not just here, just in general with different power, especially though in the superpower countries. So I've always felt like that. So it's made me sort of pretty skeptical about information I get from either side.
Wow. Like, so thinking back to that time period, was it ever like, you know how like in our time period, like kids have to run drills for mass shooters and what have you?
Oh, right.
What was it ever like that during that time period? I mean, I'm an 80s, 90s baby, so like, most of the 80s is like the tail end for me. But like, did you guys have to ever like go through drills? Like, okay, hey, they might be trying to bomb today. Like everybody go hide in this corner.
No, I think that was more 50s to 60s, wasn't it? Where they would actually go under the desk for bombings. I didn't have that, so I guess I was in between the go under the desk for bombings and then drilling for shooters. I guess was 80s and 90s are sort of in between that. So, but it was just very hyper, the hyper patriotism that had come
Mm.
back.
The
And
high level threat had turned into high level conspiracy.
yeah, conspiracy and just kind of hyped up in order to I guess just to the future plans for taking over, which sounded about right.
Let's see, Mr. Gorbachev, please tear down this wall.
Oh, good Lord.
Jess.
Giving me flashbacks, PTSD.
Yup, Jess.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Jessica Navarro. My level is C3 to C7 incomplete from a motor vehicle accident back in 2010. And then an example of misinformation. I guess misinformation for me, I was always told as a first generation Latin American that our voice in politics or policy isn't means nothing, and that was misinformation. So I kind of never got into that. I never really thought voting mattered. I really never thought getting informed, getting educated mattered, because that's what I was told. And so it wasn't until I actually got out of that mindset and connected with people that were willing to help me figure out how to understand all of that. That's kind of where I had the enlightenment. And yeah, so I'm glad that, I didn't let that misinformation hold me back for too long to get involved with things that really matter, because systemic level changes really, I mean, it only happens if people step into those advocacy roles. So yeah, that's my example. I'm really excited to be here with you all. Thank you.
Wow. And it's like that misinformation, in many ways in our political world today is still continuing and what have you. We definitely are gonna be jumping more into that. Mark,
My name is Mark. I live in Columbia, South Carolina, and I'm a C7 complete car wreck 39 years ago. Um, Misinformation. So I'm of a similar generation as Tahira, and I remember as a kid, all you heard was America was fantastic, never made mistakes. The world was led by the United States, blah, blah, blah. And then I went to college and studied political science and started reading up on all the awful things that my ancestors and others had done to indigenous people and people of color in other countries, that we just, sailed around the world or marched around the world saying, hey, we want to trade with you, open your ports, or we want some people, or we want this or that. And, you never really hear about that in your grade school, junior high, even high school textbooks. And it's like, what, really? This actually happened? And I can remember one of our professors, we were asking people, really? And he's like, yeah, this really happened. And of course, that guy was in his 50s at that point, and I was in my 20s. And yeah, wow. And another thing was, let's see, when I got hurt in 1985, the presiding wisdom was, oh, we'll have this figured out in 10 or 20 years. Well, it ain't happened yet. So apparently there's a little more to spinal cord injury than just a few things in a petri dish or new circuitry. So that's it.
Yeah, overpromise, underperforming.
It's a great example.
Yeah, it is. And Harley.
I'm Harley Draven. I'm a C7 incomplete from a diving accident on my 19th birthday in 1994. And I reside in Paris, Texas. And for me, misinformation, I guess for me, what stands out is the first time I was given false information. I was rather quiet in school, but the one time my teacher was talking about pioneers and came across the story of Joseph Smith and how he was hung. And for the first time, I actually spoke up and said, no, you are incorrect. He was shot and I can prove it. And of course, she turned red because I embarrassed her in front of the entire class, because teachers are supposed to know what they're talking about. And so she, she's like, okay, what do you mean? And so I told her the history of Joseph Smith, because I was born and raised Mormon and LDS, which is Latter-day Saint. So that's one story I was very familiar with. And the next day I brought her the book that spoke about Joseph Smith being shot, not hung. And she asked if she could borrow it over the weekend. And so she did. And she came back to school on Monday, and she actually apologized to the entire class for misinforming them about a part of history. And so that was one part of misinformation. The other one for me would be about my spinal cord injury. When I first had my injury, I was pretty bad off. I had to relearn how to brush my teeth, how to relearn how to get dressed and all those things. And I was told by the doctors right before my release date that I would never live alone. I would always need a caregiver. What else? I had less than 5% chance of walking. And I told the doctors I will walk before my 1-year anniversary. And they told me, you're young. It's nice to be hopeful, but the reality is you'll never walk. And if, and you have less than a 5% chance. And I looked at the doctor and I said, look, doc, you're not God. I'm not a textbook. Don't tell me what I will and will not do. So behind my doctor's back, I got a set of leg braces. I got a walker, and we did physical therapy right there in my apartment, because my mother lived with me for the first year after my accident. And I used a hospital bed. And my accident was June 27th, 1994. And on April 6th, 1995, I took 8 steps. And although I wasn't able to continue my body just couldn't handle walking and stuff. And of course, I haven't walked really since. Since that time, I've taken a total of 35 steps. So I did what I said I was going to do. And 8 years after my accident, I became fully independent. So I defied everything I was told by that doctor. Now, I don't know if that's misinformation to some that might not be perceived as such, but for me, it was.
Yeah, I mean, nobody knows the future, and we typically talk from our own experiences and statistics and what have you, but it's like, kind of redirect individuals to say, like, look, this is what we've seen, but there's always the potential for this to happen. And as a medical professional, as a politician, whomever, you're just hoping that these things may occur either for your favor or just based off of what you know. But, I think a lot of us get told that and our hopes get torn to pieces instead of redirecting and saying, hey, look, but you can still accomplish. And that's the whole premise of more than walking, right? Like, we're not here to dwell on the injury as much as great to vent and talk about it. But listen, you could be doing so much more and helping so many more in other communities, simply by showing people the pathway to independence is just not limited to just being what you can do on your 2 feet. So kudos to you for doing that and defying the odds. So before we get into question one, you know, I know everybody, here probably have been keeping track of some of the debates, some of the conversations that's being had amongst different political figures and political parties and all of the above, right? In the midst of all these chaotic natural disasters that we're having, and I'm quite sure we all have a lot to say. So and prepare for this, and even now, as I think about it, there used to be this black sketch comedy show in the early 90s. I hope some of y'all remember In Living Color, right? In Living Color was hilarious. It didn't matter what race you were. When you watched it, they poke fun at so many issues and so many real things that are relative to everybody in everyday life, right? So there's a character played by Kim Waynes. Her name was Benita Betrayal, and she was the neighborhood gossip. She hung outside of her apartment window, and all she did was look at people. She'd greet you in your face and say, "Oh my goodness, you looking so good, Miss Jenkins." When Miss Jenkins don't wear no underwear, you know what I mean? Yeah, her booty so low, and whatever she would come up with, right? And it was hilarious, but. You're talking very nice to me in my face, but underneath is this sinister idea that you really don't like me, and it feels that way so pervasive in our political climate. So recently a media outlet had a segment where various political figures were asked, are voters focused more on the candidate's character or their policies? As a voter, what characteristics and values should a leader have? How do you know they have them? How do you expect those qualities to affect their policy positions? And finally, what do you do when a candidate's purported values and policy conflict with each other?
So Corey, that's such a great question. And I also want to clarify, we're talking, here we started talking about being misinformed and the difference between that and disinformation. Just so that we're all talking with the same vocabulary, disinformation is the deceptive version of misinformation, right? Where there is some design behind the misinformation. There is some malintent behind it. It's not just incorrect information. And so, I think, for myself, one of the characteristics and values a leader should have is to not embrace disinformation, or not to embrace misinformation as a strategy, really valuing the truth. And, as a leader, your role is almost to persuade by educating and winning people to your side through debate. And I know there are a lot of kind of sub questions here. And so how do you know that they have them? I mean, I think we have to look at their actions, not just their words, not just the beautiful things they tell us to our face, but what do they tell to the people who disagree with them, or the people who disagree with us, their followers, right? How do they treat their antagonists? Do they try to persuade and win them over, or do they vilify them? And finally, what do we do when those things are in conflict, their values and their policies? I mean, for me, I think, I've been paying attention, on what's happening in Gaza a lot. And I really care about that issue and what's happening with, the Israeli hostages and what's happening in Lebanon. And it breaks my heart. And, why don't American politicians across the board, why can't they do more? And a lot of it, I understand like there are larger complexities. Like during an election season, every politician is paranoid of losing votes, and that leads them to make certain compromises, which we may agree or disagree with. But in the context of that, I think when those types of things happen, looking beyond and seeing, okay, what might they do in the future that is aligned with their values, even if as a politician they can't act on their values right now because of the different pressures, because being a politician means compromising. So that's kind of how I think about it. But it's really hard when there's a lot of conflicts going on in the world and you hear entire groups like the Haitian immigrants who are in Ohio being vilified. It's really important to take a step back and ask these questions. Why? What is the policy behind the words and the messages being spread? What do I think about it? And what is the impact on people who think differently? So to piggyback off of that, would love to hear, Jess, what you have to say.
Okay. Oh, I'm trying to go back to the screen with the questions. Okay. So, a characteristic that a candidate should have, I believe, is someone that can be empathetic and understanding and really try to find ways to connect people instead of dividing people. I believe in like focusing on interconnectedness and really finding common ground, I think is important because we all are going to have different backgrounds, different opinions. But I think that every human wants just like those basic needs met. And so I think that maybe finding common ground and a leader that can do that, I think is great. And then let me see, how do you know if they have them? Well, I think it'll be very if a leader has that characteristic of just looking at humanity from a empathy lens, I think that's something that you'll hear with their policies and when what they talk about. I think we live in a society where it's always been like profit over people, and I think that should shift. And I think that policies should support people instead of keeping certain groups oppressed systemically. And I think, how do you expect those qualities? And so, yeah, somebody who's transparent and someone who wants to help people and really find common ground, they're going to make sure that their boots are on the ground and they're always listening to people, always trying to find ways to actually connect with people and just really hear from people one-on-one. I think that's really important. So really getting out and really hearing from people directly. Thank you.
No problem. That's definitely I can agree with a lot of what you said. That focus on being empathetic is highly important because you think about a person who starts out, wanting to get into the political field and goes to school and studies maybe economics or, something dealing with public servitude and they have this heart, right? But what happens along that pathway to where they become possibly the mayor or on the town council, or they get elected to represent their district in their state Congress, or go as far as representing their state as far as on the national level? Where does the empathy begin to dry up and the partisanship begins to fill up that individual? And I never really hear, and maybe I'm naive to it, but you don't hear politicians talking about that aspect of their journey. Kind of like when they lose their way. So I think empathy is a quality and a characteristic that one must have because, you take, for example, what's happening in Florida, you got to take into account there are people being displaced who have disabilities, and you represent a district that I'm quite sure has folks in it with disabilities, right? And talk to them maybe before you even start running and making it a political show of like, look, I'm here, I'm helping out. I'm got boots on the ground. Maybe talk to your people in the district first and say, hey, how would you feel? Would your needs kind of be before I go running to show my face on the cameras and stuff? I need to really understand where other people are coming from because if it happened in my district, I need to be able to respond rapidly. And I find that a lot of people, I was listening to one politician who's from Louisiana. You are from a place where storms happen and it floods, but you sound very partisan in your rebuttals to anything that the other party is trying. So I think empathy is definitely something that you need. How do you know that they have it? It's got to be in their actions and not merely like just posturing. I and I want to be understanding that everyone falls short, but hypocrisy is definitely one of those things that may call into question what they do. I don't think necessarily uh, kicking someone out of office is always the solution because then you're just going to fill that space up with just somebody that may be equally just as bad, or you just want them there because they're going to be representing your party. But those are my thoughts on it. Mark, how about yourself?
Well, given the current political environment, I've got family that are diametrically different from me when it comes to politics, and I still to this day cannot figure out how people that I love and respect and have proven to be, steadfast and loyal and don't lie most of the time, and there for you no matter what, could support the other person is, not paid thousands of contractors and fines and ex-wives and just and then the other candidate has proven to be a public servant and has helped her friends and family over the years, friends that have gone through terrible situations, and helped them and helped victims of crime and just done many, many, many positive things. And people feel that way. And the actions, how has this person demonstrated over the years, each, whoever it is, those two or any other politician or public servant, are they just serving themselves? Or are they really serving the people? And are they looking out for what's best for the people rather than just themselves? And it's sad. And my daughter works for a nonprofit in Washington, D.C. called the National Democratic Institute, which tries to promote democracy and democratic values all around the world in other countries. And I got to think that job is really hard these days when those other countries say, well, how can y'all be doing this and entertaining this and having this kind of situation, but yet you want us to be a democracy? I don't know.
I mean, I think it's interesting, right? That the divisiveness that we see in the United States today, it hasn't always been this bad. And on the bright side, you could look and you can see, well, there are people coming together from both parties, who are urging the public to put country above party. I mean, which, if you think about it, like, that's pretty remarkable. Like, there aren't that many instances of cross-party unity during a presidential election. So that's just something to think about. We're not talking about Republican versus Democrat, right? The question, I think, is really what is driving people, as Mark thought. What causes people who are otherwise kind, considerate, thoughtful, and one could debate this, but to be driven by fear versus empathy. That sort of seems to be a litmus test in politics, no matter what country you're in, no matter who you're voting for, no matter who's on the top of the ticket. There's kind of there's only really two options, right? Is to utilize empathy or to utilize fear. And they have telltale signs that we have to be careful about, because sometimes that fear can be really strong, and can really kind of hook us in from concerns we have, from things we don't fully understand, from previous experiences, and it's hard to catch. which is why it's so important to have conversations like we're having. Harley, would love to hear your thoughts on this question.
Oh, goodness. Personally, I think that, I don't care who the candidate is. I don't care what political party they are. If I see them doing right by the people, then I'll do right by that candidate, regardless of what office it is. Whether it's a congressman, senator, even a state representative or president. It's what are you doing for the people? And the other thing is, doing father's rights advocacy for 5 years, dealing with the judicial system for 5 years, I've really had my eyes open to trust but verify, as we like to say. You can tell me all the sweet things in the world. You can tell me all the ugly things in the world. I'm not going to believe you. Straight up. I'm not going to believe you. I will dig through your case file. I will go back 10 years and see every little truth that you refuse to tell me. The other thing is, my husband being a PI, private investigator, I learned with him through his classes that the body tells 90% of the conversation. So you don't even have to talk to me, and your body will tell me what you're really saying. And it's like, well, if I wasn't in a chair, I could do it. But like if you have two able-bodied people, if one crosses their legs, do they cross their legs towards the other person or away from the other person? Because if they cross their legs away from the person, that means that they are now no longer engaged and they're just hoping the conversation ends. But if they cross their legs towards the other individual, it means that they truly are interested in the conversation and they want it to go further. So it's subtle things that people need to pay attention to. Definitely have a compassion and be passionate about what you're representing, what you're trying to bring to the table. It's like me being an advocate when I went to the city council meeting. It's like, I looked at all those council members and said, you got a problem and I got a solution. But if you want to get at the solution, you need to talk to me. And my solution is to allow me to volunteer my time and my expertise of 30 years of being in a wheelchair to help you make your town more accessible. Here I am, 1 year later, and I'm doing a lot of things here in this town. And I've only been here a year and 3 months. So I think it depends on how you approach things also. Are you very, negative about things? One important thing is if you're in an argument, the second you say a name, call the other person a name, any derogatory term, you immediately lose the argument. And as for fear mongering or, uplifting, I live what we call in fear all the time. Face everything and rise, or face everything and retaliate. So that's how we live in fear, or, some cowards do face everything and run, but we stand strong in ourself and we pay attention. And regardless of what any political figure tells us, do your homework and not just online. Go back as far as you can for that person's career and personal life and business life. Do your homework.
My body language says put that on a t-shirt. I like that fear acronym. That's fire. I love it. Yeah,
and we need a wheelchair version of that body language.
Yeah. That was fire. Yeah, I definitely agree with everything you said, and not just body language, but also those comments that certain politicians make that are like certain politicians make on both sides that are dog whistles to rally their base and what have you. So it's those subtleties you got to look out for too as well. Tahira, you are up.
If my fingers worked, I'd be doing the little snaps.
Oh my gosh, poetry. Go ahead, Tahira.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to snap my fingers. One of the many, things I can't. And clapping, I can't do anymore. When I approve of something, I'm just whoop, whoop, which is not always appropriate. So I'd like to get like a recorder of clapping and like lighthearted clapping, more vigorous clap. I just like to have something so I can respond in that way. But
for the purposes of this discussion, we can click our tongues.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I do like what Jess said about the empathy that if politicians, especially when they get to the point of running for president, if they still, or if they have in general, just empathy for people. Um, I don't feel like I hear much that, I mean, if you're lucky, they seem to say something sort of towards the middle class. But as far as like the working class and people who are really struggling, I I guess maybe there's not a lot in it for them, but I don't feel like I hear much that really speaks to people who are more struggling. Um, so as far as the people that that I think that need it the most, I don't know how much the candidates are in it for those people. So I basically just kind of look for the person who's more likely to do something that helps people and that looks at, at least something that will ultimately help with social services and things like that. I mean, those aren't really priorities at that level, but that's what I think of it. What's more likely to help people in what I consider to be priorities. And but yeah, I don't watch the debates at all. I'll watch something that's like a short review of a debate. I might watch that, but otherwise I feel like it's just a lot of talking points, and I don't expect to hear too much of value in that. So, and especially in this climate too, I think it's just kind of mudslinging. So I just kind of go with the person I think can do some good in some way. That's about it.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really important point that we don't ever really hear politicians really emphasize the most vulnerable, right? Um, it is all about the middle class. It is trying to kind of get the general middle ground. And when we all know, like the disabled community and other minority groups, like we're the ones that really need help, but we're yet rarely talked about. I mean, but it's also important to keep in mind that our votes have a huge difference. Like in elections that have become so tight, apathy is not an option because looking for the candidate who can tilt the balance in our favor is everything when it comes to social services. Like it can mean the difference between Medicaid getting cut and Medicaid having a chance of being expanded, of benefits having a chance of being increased and us having more access to things. Hey, super adaptables. We're in another election cycle in the US, and with so many issues at stake on the ballot, a person can easily lose sight of what they're voting for.
That's why there's ballotpedia.org. It's like an encyclopedia for American politics. You can look up trustworthy, unbiased information on past and present elections, from your local municipalities up to the presidency, to find out where candidates stand in terms of their policy position.
So, if you want to know what's going on in today's political world, check out ballotpedia.org and stay informed.
Democracy is important, but ask yourself, what would it be without the people? Every 4 years, the political season opens up and millions of citizens come out to vote.
Your vote matters, but in order to exercise that right, you have to do one thing first, and that's register.
Vote.gov is the official website of the U.S. government, where you can find a comprehensive guide on what you need to know and do if you want to make your voice heard. So don't wait any longer. Visit vote.gov today to register.
We'll shift to question 2. So public policy is a fundamental aspect of operating a democracy. Within these policies, politicians on both sides of the aisle argue about government spending with a keen focus on entitlement programs. From Medicaid to veterans benefits, the level of anxiety rises for people and persons with disabilities who fear that these programs are in jeopardy of being taken away or will drastically reduce the amount of assistance that can be subsidized. Safeguards are removed when this happens. How can we protect the most vulnerable citizens while remaining fiscally responsible? Have you personally been affected by a change in benefit policies? And if so, how did you go about resolving the issue? And before I call on someone, I just want to mention remaining fiscally responsible is kind of the argument that is always thrown at us when we can't fund benefit programs, and we don't necessarily have to agree with the framing of that question. Which I definitely don't. But that is that is what we hear. And so in order for us to effectively push back on that, we have to help people reframe the question and answer it in such a way like, I don't know, are human rights ever free? And are they, if they're not, does that mean that they're not fiscally responsible? Like what is the monetary value of having more disabled people active? And there's so much more than cost. Yes, we can get back to work, we can get jobs and pay more taxes. Maybe the costs won't always outweigh the tax revenue for us, but is that the most important thing? And does our greater participation lead to even bigger benefits that can't be quantified in dollars? So I'll leave my comments on that. But Corey, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a tough one. Especially I look at the government's ability to manage policy along with various programs like balancing a checkbook. For you viewers out there who know nothing about balancing a checkbook, here is a 101 course, right? You have the date in which you have to write this check. You put in a description, whether that's a deposit or a withdrawal, right? And then you deduct it from your overall amount of money that you have in your account. And the truth be told, no matter if we are disabled or we are able-bodied, our needs are our needs in any given time. So you take, for example, with disasters such as the two hurricanes that we recently experienced, or rather those in the South have experienced, right? Their homes are torn apart. They're looking for their insurance to cover it. They're looking for government assistance. FEMA's put out a promise with a particular voucher, right? I think it's around $750. And how do you even arrive at that number, right? You have to look at the balance in your account. And you have to say to yourself, how am I going to pay for it? But at the same token, I can't disregard the needs of people, and people get lost in the shuffle. I think I would prefer a politician telling me that straight up than to say, here is what you're going to receive. Then I apply for it, and then I don't get it, even if I meet the requirement, because that is one of those things that feels like it can be both misinformation and disinformation. You can say it because it's a point, if you're running for office, but then if you don't deliver on it, and I put my vote and my trust in what you're going to do because I'm believing that you're going to preserve or help to assist to preserve me, then I feel like I lost out. And so many people are experiencing that. So it's quite the conundrum, within your household. You may say, I'll give you a prime example. I went on a trip to Alabama, had a good time, whole week. I came back, there was no HBO, no Cinemax. There were there was no more premium channels. Did my parents tell me beforehand? No. I felt misled. How am I going to take the movies I want to watch? But they had to get rid of it. Why? Because they were trying to be fiscally responsible. Now, granted, that's a want. It's not a need, but I always use that as an example, even in my own household when I'm trying to govern it to the best of my ability. But it's a conundrum, and I just think it's tough. And so, as far as like a change in benefit policies and how did I go about resolving an issue? I had an issue. Obviously, most of you guys know me. I'm a veteran, and I was receiving care that the VA pays for in part, and the VA would be late on their payments, and then the company would reach out to me, and they were like, "Yo, make a phone call or something." I'd make a phone call. It would work sometimes. It wouldn't. Finally, they just had owed so much back pay. They just said, "Yo, your care is being cut off," and there was nothing else I could do. They didn't even want the money at that point, right? So it's an entitlement that I can have, but at the same token, if it's not being disseminated the right way, even I, as a veteran, I lost out. You know what I mean? So, like I said, again, I think it's very, very difficult. Mark, how about you?
I've read several times in various publications that you can learn a lot about a society and a people by how they treat the lowest socioeconomic or physically able parts of their society. And when you look at the United States, we're got some real discrepancies there. So a lot of things about that don't make me proud, but I am pleased to see that at least one of the candidates mentioned the other day that they're considering using Medicare for in-home care or to pay a family to help somebody that might need assistance, whether it's a parent or child or whatever the case might be. And that's encouraging, although it's certainly not going to be fiscally responsible. But the government doesn't have to be fiscally responsible, unfortunately. They have an open checkbook that never has to be balanced. It hasn't been balanced in it's like 40 or 50 years, I think. But somehow that system just keeps on going. And I've got a checkbook laying in there on my kitchen table if you need me to go show somebody what a checkbook looks like. I was going to go get it and hold it up to the screen, but I thought, no, somebody will see my account number. And then in a few days, I'll be like, what the hell happened to my account? But so, yeah, I pay most of my bills online, but there are a couple I still use an actual checkbook for. But yeah, it's been proven over the year, many studies that it's cheaper to take care of somebody at home rather than put them in an institution. So in-home care is the way to go. And if you want to be at least striving for fiscal responsibility, you come up with the funding to do that kind of thing. And the Olmstead decision from some years back, got that corrected to a point, but it's still a struggle quite a bit. Yeah.
Mark, you're reminding me that when we talk about money, right? How tangible is it? What is it? It's not real. I mean, back in the day, it was a promissory note for a load of gold in a bank somewhere. But even that, what is a load of gold? What can you do with that? You can't eat it. You can't build a house out of it. What is this thing that we call our economy? It's a contract. It's agreement that we all agree that this intangible, worthless object we can exchange, work for food. And then when we compare that with, well, what does caregiving mean to us? What does employment? What does a longer life? What does a fuller life? How does that compare in value and tangible worth? And there's no question. And I think just to put this in context with the misinformation, I want to make sure to draw the connection that, when we hear, straight up lies, documented, unequivocal lies, targeting a minority group, and let's just say, the Haitian population in Ohio, who are working, who are there trying to recover from a country, temporarily, from their own country of Haiti that is being devastated by gang violence, and they're the ones who are being vilified. I don't care what you think about the immigration issue. When any minority group is being targeted in that way, what is also being targeted and lumped into it are the social services that affect people with disabilities. And as one of the largest minority groups, we have to stand up whenever we see that happening and take that into account, with how we view our vote and what actions we should take. I'm not telling anyone how they should vote, but we have to consider all those factors, that even attacks on others are also, in the end, attacks on what we need as well. Would love to hear your thoughts on this.
And Jonathan, when you say we have to stand up, no pun intended, I assume. And
I mean,
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Oh, also though, Corey, as far as being misled, like the first question, I think coming home to no HBO is a good example. You should have mentioned that from the beginning. Misled. I came home and there was no HBO.
A parent have to
This
resign
life
their
is
parent.
a bunch of charlatans. So yeah. But let's see. Well, one thing I was going to say, as far as being fiscally responsible, I think if we want to be fiscally responsible, we have to address the issue of taxing fairly. And because the tax code favors taxing wealth versus taxing work. it always favors the wealthy. And there was some study done in 2021 showing 400 billionaire families and how the billionaires had paid an average of 8.2% tax, which is pretty low. I mean, that's lower than most teachers and people like that. And I don't know that too many people with regular jobs are paying 8%. And so I think if we averaged out the percentages that we all pay, that would certainly make it easier to be responsible if there was just more money. And if someone making 70 grand a year can pay, 25% or 20, then someone making billions or millions can just pay the same percentage. So I think it's hard to address being fiscally responsible and how much should we really spend on social services and caregiving if we're not going to tax fairly. I think that's hard to I don't see getting around that. So
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. A friend of mine said, we shouldn't even worry about tax returns. I pay the government what I owe them, and that's done. Let's not make it so complicated and what have you, because that money is just poured into the things of the collective we. I always say, and everybody should be able to pull from the resources that we collectively put in together, no matter if you're making $20 million a year or you're making $16,000 a year. We need to collectively work together. Jess, how about you?
Yes, Tahiri brought up a great topic about taxes, and I think if we want to go down the route of being fiscally responsible, I think that would be the route to take. That would be the route to take. I mean, making sure that people who are, very, very wealthy, 1% rich, are paying their taxes, because you have working class and struggling families who are paying sometimes more taxes than those who are billionaires. And so I think that maybe by spreading that out, that would be able to help maybe fund preventative care services, because I think society is very proactive. We wait until people are sick or, things like that to try to deal with health concerns. And I've always thought, like, if we are, trying to keep people healthy with food and supplements and vitamins and those type of things, then that's another way that we can be fiscally responsible and not wait, for, I don't know. There's just so much that I would like to say. And I think that kind of just sums it up. I just read a post that said, there's no income cap for billionaires, but yet for people who are working, like myself, who I'm working, and I have medical assistance through, the county. If I make over a certain amount, then I am running into the risk of losing my health insurance. And I need that because I'm still in physical therapy. I'm still in occupational therapy. And I've always thought that doesn't make sense to me, because if I'm trying so damn hard to be self-sufficient, shouldn't the government give me more incentives to continue down that route? Because I'm struggling every day to even get up. My body, every day it's a mental struggle. Every day it's a physical struggle, but yet I get the hell up and I try to do the best that I can. And and I just don't think that we give people enough credit for that. And I think that exactly what everyone has touched here, we really need to raise our voices and really be heard, because that's the only way people in these positions of leadership in politics will be able to, create, again, system level changes if we're at those tables, allowing them and letting us be heard. So I think that's all.
You make a great point, Jess. And not enough people outside, the paralysis community, the disabled community in general, very few people know that, like, we have to choose between our work and our health insurance. We have to choose between being able to get married, to stay married. I have peer mentor conversations all the time And unfortunately, one of the pieces of advice that we have to throw around is like, hey man, if you want to stay married and you're newly injured and your spouse, has too much savings, God forbid, makes too much money, is too successful at their job, you may have to consider being happily divorced in order to get on the health insurance you need to survive. And people don't know that. And if people knew that, they would be outraged. But that's the situation that we're in. That's the situation that every single American is in if they happen to acquire a disability, which can happen, anytime you step outside your house. Maybe it can even happen in your own living room. You never know. So yeah, we need more one percenters with disabilities. We need our government to allow us to become rich so we can pay our fair share of taxes. Harley, what are your thoughts about living with a disability and making it and pushing the glass ceiling for us all?
I'm right there with everybody. I've lived with a below poverty income for 30 years. Goodness gracious, fiscally responsible. Geez, I made sure, I had to live on a loaf of bread. My children had to live on a loaf of bread for 3 days. So my children had 2 or 3 slices of bread for breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 3 days while I didn't eat anything, just to make sure that, they were taken care of, because disability and the welfare system does not pay enough. And I even have a petition written up. It's 2.5-page petition talking about, life and liberty and the great American dream. And yet it's a falsehood towards people with disabilities, because I feel that being a person with a disability, I'm being punished if I were to follow that American dream and go after being, married. When you get married as a person with disability, you're forced to give up your medical, almost all your cash, your food stamps. But yet, if you have 2 able-bodied people get married, you don't force one of them to give up their income. Why are we treated different? Why? And so for me, I've always fought hard, and, I've always gone around the system, because the only time I did get married and I had good insurance was when I married a soldier. And the military insurance for active duty soldiers is really good. I'm surprised. But after we divorced, I mean, no, I am not touching that, glass slipper at all, or ceiling, whatever you want to call it. So my other half, even though we're very careful on what we say, but as far as anybody's concerned, we are just fiancés. We have that on paper. We have to tell it to everybody, but we long for the day that we would love to call each other husband and wife. We want to be that. We want that. He wanted it before I did, but we've been together 9.5 years, and we live together, but we can't fully commit, because he would lose everything. I'm not allowed to own anything over $2,000. I'm not allowed to have any assets over $2,000. So if there's anything that will benefit our lives, it always goes to his name. Like the government, for people on welfare and disability and stuff, you turn as, age 55, and anything in your name automatically gets turned over to them to pay back, all of your state insurance bills. So I have it that I inherit nothing. I don't inherit my mom's share of the house. I don't inherit her car. Everything bypasses me and goes to my grandchildren. This way, I have nothing for the government to take from me.
The rigmarole, the hoops that, Harley, you've had to jump through, that is the only way to survive. Like, there is no shame. That is, for people who don't have a disability, you're listening to this, there is nothing dishonest about working the system. That is the only way people with disabilities are able to live their lives, with the way that the system is set up. It is a broken system. It is a convoluted system. It is completely unfair and unworkable. The only way to live with it is to work around it. So just wanted to affirm you, Harley, with that.
And as for being fiscally responsible, yeah, I think the government should stand up and take notice that, we have a lot of people with disabilities, and not just regular people like us, but like, Corey, who stated he was a veteran. There's lots of veterans that come back and they're now disabled in one way or another. And what type of country has veterans that they more or less poop on And that's my point of view, that from what I've seen firsthand, and it's horrible. I mean, I saw a soldier go from, being out there going to Iraq, coming back, and he ends up a grocery clerk because he can't do anything better. And the government will do nothing to help him be better.
It's true. I mean, on one hand, there is not enough money in the world to pay every soldier, sailor, airman, marine for the amount of overtime and workload and skill set that we are trained and possess the skill to do. If you want to come out and do something more simplistic, grocery store clerk, or you want to work for Amazon, in a warehouse, fine, that's cool. But homelessness, poverty, when you are just giving me a steady paycheck on the first and the 15th, you know what I mean? And every year the pay normally gets raised, you know what I mean? But at the same token, if you threaten to shut the government down and I may not get paid, people may not get their Social Security benefits. It's like, many politicians out there kind of dangle these things as like, the carrot for the horse. And yeah, in order to get you off the system, it's like, yeah, hey, if you make a little bit more than that 1550 or that $1,500, then you good to go. And it's not true. It's simply not true. I should have the same rights as everyone else because I work damn hard. And I should be entitled to those things. I'm not leeching off the system. I'm not doing any of those things. I'm trying to be the best productive citizen that I can be, and the policymakers need to get back to that level of empathy. And that kind of summarizes what we're looking for in tomorrow's leaders is those who can empathize with the nation as a whole, because we are all their constituency, right? Like, I don't care if you're in Florida and you have a hurricane, or in California, you have a mudslide. Like, there are plenty of times I donate to those causes. I'm not in your state, but you're still an American, you're still a person, right? And if I can help a little bit, everybody should be able to join in the effort, and the policies ought to reflect that. So what do we want, right? We have a saying in here, the timeliness of wheelchair repair is 2 weeks, not 2 months, right? We need these things to happen in the immediate future, right? We're looking for character that actions speak louder than words. And with those words, you are vetting your information before you put it out to the public and not utilizing it as a propaganda tool in order to get you into the position that you want so that you can do it for your own personal gain. It's hard to act on values when you have to compromise with others. We need leaders who will stick to their guns and say, this is what I'm going to trust in because I truly believe this is direction for all people, and then it's fair and it's equitable, and everyone gets an opportunity and a chance to go for the things that they need. Again, we spoke about being empathetic and focusing on that interconnectedness, as Jess mentioned. Interconnectedness is important. We're a digital society, right? I listened to Bill Gates, who, he's part of the reason why we have the internet. And Anderson Cooper had asked him, I believe it was Anderson Cooper, he's like, did you ever imagine that something that you created would be used as a conduit for folks to mislead people? And he said, I never imagined. So going forward, those running for office, think about the decisions that you make today, because they're going to affect those who are going to become disabled in the future. Don't put an entitlement program on the chopping block now that 15, 20, 30 years from now, you may have a son or a daughter born with a disability, or a grandchild for that matter, who then can't take advantage of the system. So think forward. Hypocrisy is not ideal for pushing forward in an ideology. Stoking fear should never be the motivator behind getting elected. These generic responses, they give no confidence to us as voters. We definitely are learning more about ourselves by the treatment of other citizens and their rights and what they should be entitled to do. We need to tax fairly. And, to all politicians that may listen to this, the most vulnerable of us, we have to really watch what we're doing in order to just live a self-sufficient life and be independent, just like you. But with that being said, I thank everybody for participating in our More Than Walking video podcast discussion.
Stay tuned in and join us next month and sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn about the topic we will cover next.
So until then, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else,
keep adapting.
Take
Have a
care,
great night, everyone.
Good night.
I tell you, y'all,
Bye.
Night. Bye-bye.
Thursdays are my Fridays, and I deal with a lot of heavy stuff at work through the week, and it's really hard for me to agree to make myself come out here. But I'm always happy that I have, and I did always learn something, and I appreciate the interaction with y'all. But damn, is every month got to be so heavy? Can't we debate something like the new kickoff rule in the NFL or something? Come on.
Oh gosh,
Jeez.
we will be here.
Can we just pretend that the election's in another 4 years and we don't actually have one this year?